Are you looking for the family area?
Andre Lawson, Mariner Ridge Capital. I have a confirmed meeting.
This floor is for investors and senior leadership only.
Your office confirmed this morning. I have the email.
Excuse me?
I'm just the analyst. The decision maker is Mr. Lawson.
Get them out. This isn't a daycare.
Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
Camille Hartley did not ask his name. She did not check the confirmed appointment or glance at the email her own office had approved. She saw a man crouching to tie a little girl's shoe and made up her mind. She walked past him. She shook hands with a stranger in a suit who had shown no credentials whatsoever. And when she finally turned back, it was only to have them removed. What she had just said in a crowded hotel lobby to a man she never bothered to identify. How much would those words end up costing her? If you're new here, this channel tells stories about the moments people reveal exactly who they are and what happens next. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Crest Lane Systems had not always been a company fighting for its life. There was a time when its name carried weight in rooms that mattered, conference stages, investor dinners, trade publications that ran glossy profiles of companies rewriting the rules of enterprise software. At its peak, Crest Lane's platform connected the moving parts of large organizations in ways that felt almost elegant, finance talking to logistics, synced with customer service data flowing cleanly instead of sitting in silos. The company had been valued at nearly $900 million, and the woman who built it to that height had done so with a kind of relentless televised confidence that made people believe the momentum would never stop. Camille Hartley was good at making people believe things. What the conference audiences did not see was the acquisition that should never have been approved. Camille had moved fast the way she always moved, buying a software company whose systems looked impressive in a boardroom presentation and turned out to be nearly impossible to integrate with anything Crest Lane already ran. The fix required more engineers, more time, more money than anyone had budgeted, while the technical team fought that battle quietly. Camille kept expanding new office space in 3 cities, new management layers, new headcount added to divisions that had not yet proven they could carry the weight. Every decision made sense in isolation. Together, they became a slow bleed that no one in her inner circle had the standing to name out loud. By the time the numbers became impossible to hide, Crest Lane was losing nearly $7 million a month. The company had roughly 12 weeks of runway left before it would begin violating its credit covenants, which would trigger a chain of consequences: nervous banks, spooked clients, and eventually the kind of mass layoff that ends careers and dismantles teams that took years to build. 20 investment funds had reviewed the situation and walked away. Not because the business was unsalvageable, but because the conditions attached to saving it required a level of trust that Camille's track record had not earned. Mariner Ridge Capital was the last firm still at the table. The fund was run by Andre Lawson, who had spent 15 years building a reputation for finding companies in genuine trouble and making calls that other investors were too cautious or too conventional to make. He worked with a small group of analysts he trusted, made decisions based on his own read of a situation, and had a consistent record of being right in circumstances where being right was not obvious. His fund had rescued 4 companies in the past decade that most of the industry had written off. 2 of them were now profitable. 1 had been acquired. 1 was still turning slowly, but turning. Andre was also a single father. His daughter Nora was 9 years old, and he had raised her largely on his own since she was very young. He did not arrange his life around that fact in a way that required explanation or apology. He simply built his schedule around both things at once, the work and the child, and treated that as a normal arrangement rather than a limitation. He brought Nora to school in the mornings, showed up to parent-teacher meetings, and rearranged calls when her schedule required it, without making a project of explaining himself to people who found that unusual. The briefcase he carried was old and worn at the corners. Nora's backpack was small and bright, and she almost always had a book in it. Before Andre agreed to fly out for the final in-person meeting with Camille's team, one of his senior analysts had flagged something in Crestlane's internal records that did not appear on any balance sheet. Her name was Serena Brooks, and she had spent 3 weeks working through the company's HR files as part of standard due diligence. What she found was a pattern. Employees who carried family responsibilities, parents primarily, but also people caring for aging relatives, were consistently rated below their performance data. The language in their reviews was vague in ways that were hard to challenge directly: not fully committed, limited availability for leadership roles, personal circumstances may affect client-facing work. These phrases appeared across departments and across years, applied to people whose output, by every measurable standard, matched or exceeded colleagues who received better ratings and faster promotions. Andre read Serena's notes carefully. He did not reach a verdict. He wanted to sit across from and ask her directly how those standards had formed and whether she understood what they were actually measuring. That conversation was in part why he had decided to make the trip himself rather than send a representative. The morning of the meeting, the childcare service Andre had booked canceled without warning. He contacted Paige Reynolds, the executive assistant managing logistics on Camille's side, and let her know he would need to bring Nora to the hotel. Paige told him it was not a problem. She arranged a supervised family lounge just off the main conference wing, a quiet room with hotel staff present, so Nora could wait there comfortably while her father was in the meeting. Andre confirmed the arrangement by email. Paige responded within the hour. He arrived at the Ravensport Grand 7 minutes early. I was wearing a dark blue Oxford shirt and plain slacks. Nora walked beside him in a small backpack and carried her science book against her chest. Near the entrance, Andre stopped to retie one of her shoes, crouching down in the middle of the lobby while she waited. That was the image Camille saw from across the room, as she stood near the check-in desk, a man and a small child, and nothing else about them that registered as significant to her. She did not ask his name. She did not look at her phone. When Andre approached and introduced himself, she did not extend her hand. She glanced at Nora and asked whether he was looking for the family area, as if the answer were already obvious. Andre told her without any particular heat that he was Andre Lawson from Mariner Ridge Capital, and that his meeting had been confirmed that morning. He mentioned the email. She did not ask to see it. She told him the floor was reserved for investors and senior leadership, and that she was maintaining the professional integrity of the event. At that moment, Owen Fletcher walked in. Owen was a junior analyst from Andre's firm, present only to observe. He wore a suit and carried nothing, and he had never met Camille before in his life. She crossed the floor to greet him, smiling hand already extended, and asked whether he was from Mariner Ridge. He told her he was, and then he told her something else. The person she was looking for was Andre Lawson, who was standing directly behind her. Through her earpiece, Paige said almost the same thing, at almost the same time that Andre had arrived, that he was in the lobby, that his daughter's presence had been confirmed in advance. Camille did not adjust her position. She had already made her decision, and the new information did not dislodge it. Instead, she appeared to conclude that Andre must have overheard Owen's name and used it to try to access the conference floor. Andre held up his phone. She did not look at the screen. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes. Terrence Miles, the hotel's head of event security, was called over. He could see immediately that the man in front of him was calm, had documentation ready, and showed no sign of aggression or confusion. He suggested quietly to Camille that she verify the appointment before making any decisions. She thanked him and repeated the instruction. Terence walked Andre and Nora toward the exit, his expression carefully neutral. Nora did not cry. She walked with her father holding his hand, and on the way through the lobby she heard someone nearby murmur that it was not appropriate to bring a child to something like this. She looked down at her shoes, working through the math of it, whether she was the reason her father's meeting had gone wrong. Outside the hotel, Andre crouched in front of her on the sidewalk. He told her she had not done anything wrong. He told her the people inside had made up their minds about who he was before they were willing to listen to him, and that was not something she had caused. She nodded in a way that suggested she was filing the explanation away rather than fully absorbing it. He kept his voice steady. Then he stood up, took out his phone, and called Serena Brooks. He told her to suspend the entire due diligence process, preserve all documentation, and make no public statement. Serena reminded him that the team had spent 9 months preparing a $450 million deal structure. Andre looked through the glass doors of the hotel, where Camille had returned to speaking with Owen, as if the previous 10 minutes had not occurred. He told Serena he had just learned something more important than anything in the financial reports, and he ended the call. Back inside, Camille spent the next hour trying to build a paper trail that matched the story she had already told herself. She dictated instructions to Paige for a formal complaint to the hotel, then outlined a draft internal report describing what had happened. In her version, Andre was an unidentified individual who had attempted to access a restricted area and refused to leave. Paige listened and then said carefully that the report would not be accurate. Andre had a confirmed appointment. His daughter's presence had been approved in advance. He had left without argument when asked. The original incident report from Terence said the same thing. Camille told Paige to send the draft to the legal team for revision, framing the situation as a potential disruption to a credentialed event. That was when Owen appeared in the doorway. He explained to Camille with the particular discomfort of someone delivering a message they had not asked to carry that Andre Lawson was the decision-maker on the Mariner Ridge deal, the founding partner who controlled the investment, not a junior representative. He said it plainly and did not editorialize. Then he left. Paige set a folder on the desk without comment. The first page was a photograph, Andre Lawson, the caption beneath it, reading Founding Partner and Managing Director, Mariner Ridge Capital. The pages that followed documented his investment history. The companies he had stabilized, the returns his fund had generated, and the terms of the $450 million proposal he had prepared for Crest Lane. Camille stared at the photograph for a long time. Warren Cole, Crest Lane's chief financial officer, entered the office and closed the door. He did not sit down. He told her that Mariner Ridge was not one option among several, it was the only option remaining. If Andre withdrew, the 2 partner funds that had agreed to co-invest would follow. There was no time to restart due diligence with a new lead investor. They had 12 weeks of cash left, possibly fewer, if the bank learned that the last deal had collapsed. Warren said all of this in the tone of someone who had rehearsed the words because he knew they needed to land without cushioning. Camille looked at the photograph again. The man she had read as out of place as someone who did not belong on that floor was the single person with the power to decide whether 2,800 employees would have jobs in the spring. She had built her refusal on the image of a father with his daughter in a hotel lobby, and that image had cost her everything she was now desperately trying to preserve. The question she had to answer, not for this board, not for the press, but for herself, was whether she was capable of understanding what she had actually done. Camille called Andre's number 3 times before she accepted that he was not going to pick up. She left a message on the first attempt, choosing her words, with the kind of deliberate care that sounded composed on the surface and revealed underneath that she already knew the explanation was not going to hold. She called what had happened a miscommunication in the reception process. In her second message, the hotel became the responsible party, something about a coordination failure between their staff and her team. By the time she drafted a written follow-up, the language had shifted again, this time to regret that she had not recognized him sooner, as though the problem were a simple matter of not having been introduced properly. Paige read the draft without comment, then asked one question: if Camille had known from the start who Andre was and what he controlled, would she have let him walk in with his daughter? Camille did not answer. Paige pulled up the lobby footage on her laptop and turned the screen to face her. Camille watched herself move through the lobby, the decision she had made without deliberation, the person she had chosen to welcome the man she had chosen to remove. There was nothing in the footage that could be reframed as a procedural error or a failure of hotel coordination. It showed exactly what had happened, and it showed who had made it happen. Warren's phone buzzed first. He read the notification and looked up at Camille with an expression that had moved past alarm into something quieter and more final. Mariner Ridge had formally suspended the due diligence process. 30 seconds later, the first partner fund sent its withdrawal notice. The second followed within the minute. Whatever window had existed to course-correct inside a private conversation had closed, and the situation had now moved into territory that could not be managed by revision or careful messaging. The video from the lobby reached social media before the business day ended. The clip had been recorded by a business traveler sitting in the hotel's lobby seating area, who had not intended to post it until he heard the phrase, "This isn't a daycare," spoken in front of a 9-year-old. It circulated quickly, not because the confrontation was dramatic, but because of what the footage made visible: a man who had produced every piece of required documentation being walked out, while a man who had produced nothing was welcomed in. Clients who had spent years trusting Crestlane's stability began asking quiet questions. The bank requested confirmation that the Mariner Ridge deal was still active. And inside the company, a different kind of question had started moving in hallways and message threads, whether what people had just watched was actually new, or whether it was the public version of something they had already been living with. The board convened an emergency session 2 days later. Judith Mercer, the board chair, opened by telling Camille that the meeting would proceed with full documentation and that Paige Reynolds had been asked to present a timeline of events. Camille said the video lacked context. Judith told her the board intended to establish the context themselves. Paige walked through everything methodically: the confirmed appointment, the email Andre had sent notifying them about Nora, the written approval from Camille's own office, the original incident report from Terrence, and then placed beside it, without commentary, the revised version Camille had asked the legal team to produce. The board looked at both documents at the same time. The original described a confirmed investor with an approved guest who left without incident. The revision described an unidentified individual who had introduced a child into a restricted area and required removal. Every factual element had been softened, reattributed, or replaced. Terrence appeared by video call and confirmed in plain terms that Andre had not raised his voice, had not threatened anyone, and had walked out without argument the moment he was asked. Camille acknowledged that she had requested the revision. She said she had been trying to protect the company. Denise Carter, who managed enterprise client relationships and had been with Crestlane for 6 years, spoke next. She said that protecting the company and protecting the accuracy of the record were not in conflict unless the record had something to hide. Then she set down a stack of folders and explained what was inside them. Over the previous 3 years, Crestlane's internal performance reviews had produced a pattern that Denise had been tracking for her own reasons. A senior engineer who had asked to work remotely 2 days a week so he could manage childcare had been rated as lacking commitment, despite completing every project ahead of schedule. A female operations manager who cared for 2 elderly parents had been passed over for a director role on the grounds that she lacked the flexibility required at that level, though no one had defined what that flexibility actually meant in practice. A father on the enterprise sales team had been told he was not eligible for a leadership track because he was unavailable for evening client events that other senior staff attended primarily as social occasions, and which had no measurable impact on deal outcomes. Meanwhile, colleagues who worked late because they had no family obligations waiting at home were described in their reviews as showing exceptional dedication and organizational commitment. The standard was never written down anywhere. It simply operated consistently in one direction. Denise then placed her own file on the table. She had been evaluated as a candidate for CEO succession 3 years earlier and removed from consideration. The assessment concluded that her family responsibilities made it difficult to project the executive presence the role required. Camille had signed off on the policy framework that generated that assessment. The language in the policy presence commitment availability was never attached to a concrete standard. It simply meant in practice that the people who were always reachable were treated as more serious, regardless of what their actual work produced. What had happened at the Ravensport Grand was not an isolated incident of poor judgment under pressure. It was one moment in which a set of assumptions Crest Lane had been operating under for years became visible to people outside the building. The board opened a formal independent investigation, removed Camille's authority over HR documentation and external communications, and made clear that the path forward was not simply a matter of repairing a deal. The company needed to demonstrate that the framework used to evaluate its people had fundamentally changed. 3 days after the board session, Camille flew to Mariner Ridge's offices without an appointment. She arranged for a trusted friend to stay with Nora for the day, the kind of arrangement Andre himself had to make constantly, and which she had never previously had reason to think about. She gave her name to the front desk and said she was hoping to speak with Andre Lawson. The receptionist offered to pass along a message. Camille said she would wait. She sat in the lobby for nearly 4 hours. During that time, she watched the office move around her. A managing director ended a call, checked his watch, and told his assistant he needed to leave in 20 minutes to pick up his son from school. The assistant nodded and rescheduled the next meeting without discussion or visible inconvenience to either of them. A junior analyst appeared on a video call from a conference room, her daughter visible in the background, clearly homesick. The call continued. No one mentioned it afterward in the tone people used when something had been tolerated rather than accommodated. Camille had been in professional rooms for most of her career. She had never noticed that the rooms she built looked different from this one. Andre came to the lobby just before 5 o'clock and agreed to give her 20 minutes. They sat in a small meeting room with a glass wall. Camille began by saying she was sorry for not having recognized him sooner, and Andre stopped her before she finished the sentence. He told her that framing it as a matter of recognition still made the apology about his credentials rather than about what had actually occurred. He asked her to consider what the morning would have looked like if the numbers attached to his name had been different or absent entirely. He asked whether if the video had not existed, she would have thought about Nora again after leaving the hotel. Camille tried to explain herself using the language of pressure and protocol and the difficulty of managing a high-stakes event in real time. Andre did not interrupt. He simply let her finish and then let the silence that followed do its own work. After a long moment, she said it plainly. She told him she had looked at a man caring for his daughter and concluded before a single question was asked that he could not be the most important person in the room. She had read the act of caring for a child as evidence of diminished seriousness and had taken his responsibility and made it into a liability. Andre did not respond to that with reassurance. He told her he was willing to consider a restructured investment proposal and that no part of the $450 million would be used to protect her position or her public image. A week later, Andre presented the restructured terms in writing. The first tranche of capital would be released immediately, restricted exclusively to payroll product, infrastructure, existing client commitments, and payments to small vendors who could not absorb a delay. The remaining capital came with conditions. Camille was required to leave the CEO role within 6 weeks, with no involvement in selecting her successor. She would forfeit the transition bonus in her contract, and no leadership bonuses of any kind would be drawn from the invested capital. An independent firm would audit every hiring, promotion, and performance review decision made over the preceding 3 years, and any review containing vague language around commitment presence or personal circumstances would be reopened and evaluated against actual work output. Going forward, employees with caregiving responsibilities would be assessed by specific measurable results. A formal, flexible work framework with transparent standards, not manager discretion, would replace the existing informal system. Paige Denise Terrence and anyone else who had provided documentation or testimony would be protected from retaliation by written policy. Crest Lane would issue a public correction regarding the events involving Terrence and would not pressure the hotel to alter its own account. Progress on every condition would be reported quarterly, and the next tranche of capital would not be released until the numbers matched the commitments. The final requirement had no procedural equivalent. Camille would stand in front of the entire company and describe what she had done in her own words without calling it a misunderstanding or a process failure. Andre said he was not asking her to perform a transformation she had not yet actually undergone. He was asking the company to prove that its decisions looked different after the cameras stopped paying attention. Camille read the terms twice and signed them the same afternoon. She had lost the title. She had spent a decade building the financial package she had negotiated as her exit cushion and any claim to shaping what Crest Lane became next. What remained was the part she had been avoiding since the moment Paige turned that laptop screen toward her, standing in front of the people her system had failed, and saying so without a safety net. The all-company meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, and Crest Lane's communications team had spent 2 days drafting a statement they believed was defensible. It acknowledged the situation at the hotel in measured terms, expressed regret for any confusion that had arisen, and committed the organization to a review of its internal processes. The language was professional in the way that language becomes professional when its primary purpose is to limit exposure rather than say something true. Paige read the draft, set it on the desk, and asked Camille which sentence named what she had actually done. Camille read through it again. There was no such sentence. She asked Paige to clear her calendar for the rest of the afternoon, and she wrote something else. There was no stage for the Thursday meeting, no opening video, no music. 2,800 employees gathered in person and on video call, and Camille stood at the front of the room alone holding a single sheet of paper she had written herself and barely looked at. She told them Andre Lawson had a confirmed appointment. She told them her own office had approved Nora's presence in writing before the meeting day. She told them Andre had introduced himself by name, identified his firm, and produced the confirmation email on his phone, and that she had not looked at any of it. She told them she had crossed the room to greet someone who had offered no identification whatsoever, simply because he arrived in a suit and appeared to belong there. Then she said the part she had rewritten the most times she had looked at a man caring for his daughter and decided before a single word was exchanged that he could not be the person she was supposed to meet. She had converted his responsibility into a reason to dismiss him, done it quickly and without deliberation, and had then spent considerable effort trying to make the record say something different. From the back of the room, a hand went up. The employee who spoke was a man in his mid-30s who asked without accusation, but without softness, whether Camille would be standing there if Andre had not controlled $450 million, and if the video had not been recorded by a stranger in the lobby. Camille told him no. She said that if the money had not been attached and the footage had not existed, she would likely have returned to her office and not thought about the two of them again. She said that made what she had done worse, not more forgivable. Another employee spoke a father who had been with the operations team since the company's early years. He asked whether the apology would restore the promotion he had been passed over for 3 years earlier, the one whose rejection had cited his unavailability for evening functions. Camille told him it would not. She told all of them that an apology could not return time or income, or the moments people had surrendered, trying to prove they were serious enough for a system that had already made up its mind. She said the audit would review those decisions and that she would cooperate with it fully, including after she was no longer employed by the company. There was no applause when she finished. She had not asked for any, and the room did not offer it. Judith Mercer addressed the company briefly after Camille stepped back. She announced that Denise Carter would lead the transition period as interim CEO effective immediately upon Camille's formal departure in 6 weeks. Denise walked to the front of the room. She did not give a speech. She told the company they would begin the work and that it would be visible in decisions rather than announcements. Then she ended the meeting and started making calls. Camille moved to the side, then to the wall, then out through a back corridor she had never used before, because the route she had always taken ran straight through the center of the room. The audit firm was brought in within the first 2 weeks. Their process was straightforward: pull every performance review flagged for language around commitment, availability, and personal circumstances, then cross-reference each assessment against the employee's actual output. Project completion rates, client retention numbers, deadline adherence, measurable error rates, peer feedback tied to specific outcomes. In case after case, the subjective language in the review did not match the objective record beneath it. One of the first files they reopened belonged to a software engineer on the infrastructure team who had been rated as unreliable outside standard business hours. His project data showed he had met every deadline assigned to him over 3 consecutive years and had never missed a genuine emergency response. The note about unreliability had been added after he disclosed that he could not regularly attend optional late afternoon stand-ups because he picked up his children at 3:30. The subjective rating was removed, the correction was documented, and he was reinstated on the promotion track he had been taken off. In a separate review session, a team manager submitted an evaluation describing a direct report as not fully invested in her role. The evidence offered was that she left the office at 5 o'clock most days. Denise sat across from the manager and asked a single question: which deliverable had she missed? The manager searched his notes and could not produce an example. From that point forward, every performance rating at Crest Lane had to be anchored to a specific behavior, a measurable outcome, a deadline, or a documented quality standard. The presence of a body in a chair after business hours did not qualify as evidence of anything. Meeting schedules were restructured so that anything requiring full leadership attendance happened between 9 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, except in situations that were genuinely urgent, and the definition of genuinely urgent was written into policy rather than left to individual managers to determine. Employees who needed to join remotely because of a family situation could request that accommodation without explaining the details of their personal lives to their entire team. Paige implemented one additional change on her own authority, and Denise formalized it within the month. Any request to alter a meeting record or internal documentation now required the requester's name to be logged alongside the request. The original document was preserved in full. There were no exceptions. Andre did not release the next tranche of capital based on the policy announcements. He sent a list of specific questions to Crestlane's board and waited for the answers to come back in data. How many files had been reviewed? How many promotion decisions had been reversed? How many employees had used the flexible work accommodation without a corresponding drop in their performance rating? Whether any retaliation had been reported against the employees who had testified? What the gap looked like between leadership compensation and average employee compensation, and whether it had changed. The answers took 11 weeks to compile. When they arrived, the numbers were not perfect, but they were honest, and the trajectory they described was consistent. Andre approved the second tranche. The company did not recover overnight. Stabilization looked quieter than the crisis had. Payroll met on schedule. A mid-sized client that had put its renewal on hold came back to the table after Denise flew out personally to present the audit results. A cost reduction plan developed by a member of the infrastructure team, someone who had been consistently overlooked in leadership discussions. Despite a strong track record, the audit had since surfaced, was reviewed and approved on its merits. It reduced server costs across 2 product lines and protected a group of junior developers from a potential round of cuts. His name stayed on the report. 14 months after the morning, at the Ravensport Grand Crestlane hosted its annual investor conference at the same hotel. The lobby was largely unchanged, the same pale marble floors, the same quality of light through the tall windows. What had changed was not visible in the architecture. Camille was not managing the event. She had no formal role in the conference and had requested none. She was present as a panelist for a single discussion segment and had arrived early, taking a seat near the back of the lobby while the room filled around her. Denise was upstairs preparing her remarks as confirmed CEO. Paige was running event logistics with the kind of authority that had always been hers, but had not always had room to be visible. Terrence Miles had been invited to participate in a roundtable on institutional accountability, specifically what it means for someone in a security or operations role to push back on an instruction they believed to be wrong. Andre arrived with Nora a few minutes before 10. I was wearing the same dark blue Oxford shirt. The briefcase was the same one worn at the same corners. Nora was taller, her hair pulled back differently, but she carried the same kind of book, a different title, the same category, the same habit of holding it against her chest as she walked. The front desk attendant looked up when they approached, asked for Andre's name, checked the registration list, and let him know the main session room was ready on the 3rd floor. When she saw his title on the screen, her expression did not change. Camille crossed the lobby and stopped a few feet away. When she extended her hand, Andre looked at it for a moment, long enough to acknowledge what the gesture carried, and then he shook it. The exchange was brief and did not try to be more than it was. It was not forgiveness, and it was not closure. It was 2 people confirming without making a ceremony of it that the work had continued after the public attention had moved on. In the panel discussion later that morning, the moderator asked Camille what she had most fundamentally misunderstood on the day of the incident. She set aside the careful answer she had prepared. She said she had believed for most of her career that serious people appeared a certain way, that the absence of visible obligation, the ability to show up anywhere at any time without accounting for anyone else, was itself a form of proof. She had confused that kind of availability with capability, and she had confused the privilege of having family responsibilities handled invisibly by someone else with the quality of leadership itself. She said she had been wrong about what authority looked like, and she had built a company culture around that mistake for years before a hotel lobby made it impossible to ignore. When the moderator turned to Andre and asked why he had ultimately followed through on the investment, he said he had not done it on the basis of an apology. Apologies were easy to produce when the alternative was expensive. He had done it because the files had been corrected, because the people who had spoken up were still employed and still advancing, and because the employees inside that building had stopped having to calculate the cost of being present for their families before deciding whether to ask for what they needed. After the panel near the end of the morning session, a young man walked into the hotel lobby with a toddler in tow. His conference badge had flipped around, showing only the blank white back. He had a small tote bag over one shoulder, with the rounded handle of a sippy cup sticking out of the top. He approached the front desk, and the attendant looked up, mild, asked for his name, found him on the list, and directed him to registration without a flicker of hesitation or assessment. Andre was standing near the window. He saw it happen, and the expression that crossed his face was not triumph and was not relief. It was quieter than either of those things. Crest Lane had not proven. It had changed by welcoming Andre Lawson after learning what he controlled. Any organization could manage that. It had proven something harder, that the person who walked in without credentials, without a recognizable name, without anything to offer except the ordinary fact of his presence, was still worth the same courteous, unhurried attention. That was the standard the lobby had failed 14 months ago. That was the standard it had just without fanfare or intention met. A person is not less ambitious because they choose to show up for their child. Responsibility is not a sign of weakness, and respect only means something when it is given before anyone in the room knows what you are worth. If this story stayed with you, it would mean a lot. If you subscribed, it helps this channel keep telling stories that are worth finishing. See you in the next one.